At the core of human psychology lies a quiet but powerful desire, the desire to be understood. More than we crave praise, more than we crave admiration, and sometimes even more than we crave love, we long for someone who can enter our world and recognize what we feel, what we think, and why we act the way we do. When someone understands us, they do not merely analyze our behavior from the outside. They make an effort to see the internal logic behind it, the intentions, the fears, the hopes, and the private calculations that define how we move through life. In a world where every mind is enclosed inside a private universe, understanding functions as a rare bridge. Being understood is not the same as being agreed with. Agreement is transactional. It lives at the level of ideas. Understanding is relational. It lives at the level of identity. When someone understands us, they acknowledge that our inner world makes sense, even if the external world may disagree. This is why understanding feels like relief. It validates our experience without requiring approval or victory. Love, surprisingly, is not always enough to create this sense of recognition. Parents may love their children deeply and yet completely fail to understand them. Couples may share passion and affection, but remain strangers within each other's emotional landscapes. Friends may spend years together and still misread each other's motives and sensitivities. Without understanding, love becomes fragile and unstable. With understanding, even ordinary relationships gain depth and resilience. To understand someone is to reduce the loneliness of consciousness. It is to temporarily inhabit another person's viewpoint and say, I see how your world is constructed, and it makes sense to me. Few forms of attention are as powerful because few forms of attention address our fear of isolation so directly. We often imagine that our deepest need is to be admired, respected, or desired. But admiration can be superficial, respect can be formal, and desire can be fleeting. Understanding, by contrast, is intimate. It allows us to feel real in the presence of another person. It allows us to feel seen. If understanding is such a deep human need, then we must ask what it actually delivers. One of its most immediate functions is validation. Validation does not mean telling someone they are correct. It means telling them they make sense. When people feel understood, they no longer need to defend themselves so fiercely. They no longer feel as though their internal logic is invisible or absurd. Understanding also gives us attention, not attention in the superficial sense, like being noticed or observed, but attention in the psychological sense, the feeling that someone has entered our inner space and is looking around carefully. Many people live their entire lives in environments where they are seen physically but not understood mentally. This creates a subtle but persistent hunger for recognition, a hunger that does not disappear simply because someone loves us, provides for us, or spends time with us. To understand someone requires listening, but listening in this context is not passive. It is not waiting for our turn to speak. Real listening involves curiosity, the willingness to ask, what is the logic behind this person's behavior, rather than, how do I correct them? Most people have never been listened to in this way, not even by the people closest to them. This is why, when real understanding finally arrives, even briefly, it feels so profoundly relieving. There is a reason therapists, good teachers, and wise friends have such an impact. They listen without rushing to impose their own frameworks. They allow another person's internal architecture to reveal itself before forming judgments. This type of attention feels almost medicinal. It reduces defensiveness. It lowers psychological temperature. It allows cooperation to emerge without force. And because understanding meets such deep needs, attention, validation, recognition, Coherence. People naturally move toward those who understand them and away from those who don't, even if they cannot articulate why. Understanding is not only psychologically comforting, it is socially useful. In every domain where human cooperation is required, from families to companies to friendships, understanding functions as a kind of currency. Those who possess it can build alliances, resolve conflicts, and coordinate action far more effectively than those who rely on authority or argument alone. In business, for example, successful companies are not merely selling products, they are selling responses to human needs. They do not begin by asking, "What can we produce?" but by asking, "What problem does the customer need solved?" Companies that fail to understand their customers' frustrations, desires, and constraints rarely survive. Entire industries have risen and fallen on the simple distinction between knowing what people want and merely hoping they will want what you are offering. The same dynamic appears in leadership. A manager who understands their team can anticipate unspoken anxieties, recognize hidden strengths, and adjust expectations in a way that feels fair rather than oppressive. Without understanding, even reasonable instructions feel authoritarian. With understanding, even difficult requests feel collaborative. Understanding also accelerates trust. We trust those who understand us not because they flatter us, but because they reduce uncertainty. When someone understands us, we can predict how they will interpret our behavior and how they will respond. Predictability is the bedrock of cooperation. Without it, relationships become exhausting. We are constantly guessing how our actions will be taken, how our words will be read, and how our motives will be judged. This is why skilled negotiators, mediators, therapists, and diplomats place understanding at the center of their craft. They are not merely aligning goals, they are aligning interpretations. Once interpretations align, solutions become almost obvious. Without alignment, even simple tasks feel unnecessarily difficult. In this way, understanding is both a personal comfort and a strategic advantage. If being understood feels so good, then being misunderstood is equally painful. Misunderstanding creates frustration, resentment, and in some cases, even despair. When others cannot grasp our intentions or our inner logic, we begin to feel as though we are living in a world that does not reflect us. It is a subtle form of erasure. Our inner life exists, but it doesn't register in the minds of others. Many interpersonal conflicts do not arise from malice, but from misinterpretation. A teenager argues with their parents not because they hate them, but because they feel unseen. A spouse becomes distant not because they no longer care, but because they feel chronically misread. Employees become disengaged not because they are lazy, but because no one understands the obstacles they face or the motivations that drive them. Misunderstanding also creates a sense of injustice. When our actions are judged without regard to our intentions, we feel wronged. We want to protest. You don't know the whole story. And indeed, most conflict is not a clash of values, but a clash of narratives. Each side is explaining themselves within a private context that the other cannot see. At the societal level, misunderstanding can escalate into hostility, stigma, alienation, and even violence. Groups that feel misunderstood or misrepresented often respond with defiance, not because they seek conflict, but because they seek visibility. Crime, rebellion, protest, and extremism sometimes emerge when people cannot secure understanding through more conventional channels. In this sense, misunderstanding is not merely inconvenient, it is destabilizing. If misunderstanding is destabilizing, then understanding is stabilizing. Understanding allows individuals, families, and societies to function with less friction and less fear. It reduces emotional uncertainty and replaces reaction with interpretation. Understanding is not the same as agreement or forgiveness. It is not a sentimental gesture. It is a pragmatic tool. When we understand someone's behavior, whether it is a child acting out, a partner withdrawing, or a stranger breaking the law, we gain insight into the mechanism behind the action. Mechanisms can be influenced, shaped, redirected, and in some cases prevented. Punishment without understanding often hardens behavior. Understanding without punishment often softens it. This is why therapists reduce self-harm, why good teachers reduce delinquency, and why restorative justice programs can reduce recidivism more effectively than traditional punishment. When people feel understood, they no longer need to shout with their behavior. They no longer need to demand visibility through extremes. Understanding helps prevent escalation. It prevents misinterpretation from compounding into hostility. It prevents isolation from turning into resentment. And it prevents resentment from turning into retaliation. In this way, understanding is not only a personal virtue, it is a social safety mechanism.